Ex-prisoners of Reddit, what was the worst thing you saw inside the prison walls? I spent 6 years in prison. 1 month and I watched a Crip-on-Crip gang stabbing. They stabbed the guy 60 plus times while he was curled up in a ball screaming help. But nobody could because you'd be a target next. He somehow survived but I couldn't tell you how. I think about it every day. Saw someone break a small branch off a tree in the yard, dry it out in the sun, sharpen it down to a point on the concrete and then stab a guy in the back with it 4 times. He had to be airlifted to hospital because it punctured his lung. Modern problems require Stone Age solutions. Modern solutions create Stone Age problems. Return to monkey. Reject humanity. English female prison. I saw a woman get held down by 2 others while a third woman proceeded to shove her hand up the woman's vagina to check if she had came in with a parcel of drugs. This was in the communal shower, so yeah, addicts don't give a duck. Sounds horrifically painful. The complex trauma would never leave. Did they have any reason to think she had drugs? I saw a guy get in a fight with his cousin over a 50-cent bowl. This escalated more and more until they started fighting. We all kinda watched out the corner of our eyes. BC it was in the cell while the doors were open. Well, the guy that was pissed about the bowl grabbed the dude by the hair and bite a huge hunk of his cousin's eyebrow off. Like about half of it. If that wasn't bad enough, me and my cellmate moved into the cell. BC it was further away from the TV. So we are cleaning up the cell and my cellmate goes, "Holy duck, look at this." He lifts up what I thought was a dead hairy bug. Nope, furry ass eyebrow and skin. Doesn't haunt me, just crazy to think a guy lost half an eyebrow over a fucking 50-cent bowl. I spent 8 years in prison, in the state of Georgia. There was a guy who made a hustle of hiding illegal cell phones for the Mexican gangs. When a shakedown search occurred, this man was responsible for the loss of many of those cell phones. He was confronted on the yard, and tried to escape by climbing the fence. He got stuck in the razor wire, shredding his forearms, while 7 or 8 Mexican gang members were stabbing him all in the back of his legs and his ass. That's the gang mentality that I find to be the most bullshit. You tell this guy to hold on to these phones for cigs or whatever, he agrees, you then proceed to give him way more contraband than he could possibly hide, it gets found, Hess probably getting time in the hole, the Mexicans get off scot-free, but they still want revenge on the guy. Mob mentality is the worst thing about any group, and that's a fact. None of us are as stupid as all of us. I remember people kinda turned on each other out of boredom. I mean, you made friends and all, but you had it hanging over you that you were a bad guy, and some people took to being assholes and provoked others seemingly out of boredom. It was an unpleasant situation to be on the other side, because you wanted to stay out of trouble too, but at the same time had to stand up for yourself. Maybe not the absolute worst I saw, but something I remember. That sounds like high school, just more risk of being murdered. If you've heard of Sean Atwood. Hess, this British dude that got put in high security and a ton of time for selling tons of LSD. And did a blog and talks about his experience in jail. And one of the shot callers in jail told him it's high school rules with real life consequences, so you sound pretty on the money there with that assessment. It's not the craziest thing I saw, but it's a social norm in prison that goes on daily. They'll never forget how socially acceptable jackers were. Like somebody would be wearing a coat or hoodie etc. and stare at a female CO and jack off. Sometimes sitting on a bench, sometime the TV room, and nobody bats an eye. One time a dude was like, "Hey man, can you move a row over?" She know him watching and didn't skip a beat, cranking off to an ugly 60-something-year-old woman. It's ducked up, but after a while you just accept that some people went nuts in there. Done 11 years myself. One of the worst things I've seen is 2 members of a gang called Goodfellas, aka 40 Deep, jumped on a blood on the way back from pill call. One used a large knife, the other had a fan motor in a net bag and used that as a flail. Also heard multiple people being raped. A friend of mine admitted to me after a year or so that he had been actively raped every night by his roommate, a oak from the Bloods, for about a 5-month period. There's more, just what I could think of. ATM. Not prison but jail. 6 months pregnant and her water broke. 'Cause didn't believe her and waited to take her to the hospital until she was hemorrhaging. The baby died and the woman was released because they didn't want to pay medical costs. This was 2004-ish. Wow. That's ducked up. They release people if it gets too expensive. It makes it so obvious how prisoners are just money products for prisons. Yeah, we had an inmate in our county jail when I was a co that was diagnosed with a brain tumor, so they just let her out because it would been too expensive to take care of. So yes, definitely. While not prison and certainly tame by comparison, the worst thing I saw in jail was refusal to allow people to use the restroom. We, 6 of us, were all waiting 12 hours for processing in a small town in NC and were put in a concrete cell with a toilet. Every time we stood up to use the toilet, an officer would yell at us to sit back down. For those who disobeyed, they were forcibly handcuffed and moved somewhere else, often pissing themselves during the ordeal. Editing to add some detail and hopefully answer some questions I've seen in the comments. I was a first year in college going to Campbell University. I was arrested and taken to the Harnett County Jail, where I was eventually served an ex parte restraining order. That order was thrown out less than a month later, but charges pending existed on my record for years after until I could get it expunged, which cost me quite a few jobs. That sounds really cruel, if not illegal, of the guards. I had a lawyer buddy who used to work for a court out in Nevada. He told me this: the prisoners who come through our court are like right here, holds his hand out, low to the ground, to demonstrate that they are total low lives. The guards who come through our court are like right here, raises his hand like half an inch above the prisoners. There was talk about a guy assaulting his own daughter. Some guys made him a cup of morning coffee. Morning coffee is basically taking a kettle, pour cooking oil in it, heat it up and add a lot of sugar and then throw it in someone's face. It was very uncomfortable to see and hear. Edit, whoa. First comment to really blow up like this. Edit 2, 10K upvotes? Holy duck, I never thought a day would come where I came home to that. Thanks for the awards, strangers, although I must admit that I have mixed feelings about those helpful ones. I've noticed from these comments that when people do what you described, they add large amounts of sugar. Why is that? Is it because the concoction becomes like syrup and hard to remove? Yep. Makes the boiling oil stick and burn into the skin, almost like Molotov, benzene mixed with styrofoam, or something like that. Molotov is just a gasoline benzene filled bottle with a rag, created by the Finnish to fight spite the Russian General Foreign Minister Molotov. Styro wasn't invented yet, but you can use polystyrene and acetone to make napalm in a similarly pyrotechnic way. Are you thinking of the homemade napalm? Thanks for the correction. And I think so. I just remember some guy in there telling me that Molotov cocktails were made by adding gasoline with styrofoam and other crazy stuff. Guy seemed like a Wikipedia regarding arming a riot. You totally can add styrofoam. Gas is a very strong solvent. It will absolutely reduce polystyrene to a congealed sticky mess that is probably worse than a standard petrol bomb, mostly for the sticky mess that burns with impunity like you mentioned above. I'd call that an improved Molotov. Honestly, that guy was onto something stronger than run-of-the-mill lit rags and gas in a bottle. Not a prisoner, but worked in a prison clinic for a few weeks while in med school. Was under the mentorship of the prison GP. Had this one guy come into the clinic for a routine visit who had a colostomy. We did our physical, blah blah, and the guy was about to leave. The GP mentoring me said, "Hey, check out his colostomy real quick." The guy awkwardly peeled part of his bag off and he has these red blisters weeping fluid around his colostomy stoma. I was totally confused and the guy left super quick. GP just shrugged. Later that day, I asked the GP what was up. Apparently the other prisoners ducked that guy's colostomy hole, and he had gotten herpes of the colostomy from the other prisoners. Haunts me to this day. What an awful day to be literate. Seeing someone on the threes jump to his death. Just missing PPL on the deck. Saw a guy try to kill himself. The block only had 2 tiers, he walked up the stairs and the phones were right at the top. He grabbed the hook and used it to climb on top of the phone with the side railing. He then leaned over the rail holding the hook and fell back. He just broke his back and did the rest of his bid life in a wheelchair. Life with an extra dose of duck you. That's wild.